What happens when jets designed during the Cold War try to stare down one of the most advanced warships of the 21st century? That's exactly the showdown that just unfolded in the Caribbean. An encounter between the United States and Venezuela that started as a show of defiance, but quickly revealed just how wide the gap in power really is. The story begins with a single strike. On a humid September afternoon, a U.S. aircraft dropped precision-guided munitions on a Venezuelan-linked speedboat suspected of smuggling drugs and weapons. The blast tore the vessel apart, killing 11 men on board. Washington framed it as a victory in its war on narco-terrorism. Caracas, however, called it something very different, a violation of sovereignty, an act of aggression. Within days, the waters south of the Caribbean lit up with activity. The U.S. surged over 4,000 troops, multiple destroyers, and surveillance aircraft into the region, making it clear that any challenge at sea would be answered with overwhelming force. But Venezuela couldn't simply stay silent. Under pressure at home, President Nicolás Maduro vowed retaliation. His military chose a move that was loud, visible, and symbolic, a flyby. 2 F-16 fighters Venezuela had purchased from the United States back in the early 1980s, were scrambled. Their mission? Buzz a U.S. destroyer. At 2:30 p.m. local time, the roar of twin afterburners thundered across the waves. The jets streaked low over the Caribbean, banking hard toward the USS Jason Dunham, an Arleigh Burke-class destroyer bristling with sensors and missiles. On the deck, sailors shaded their eyes, watching the jets slash across the sky. To the naked eye, it was an intimidating display. Supersonic fighters screaming overhead, wings flexing in the sunlight. To the ship's advanced sensors, the Venezuelan F-16s weren't a threat. They were targets. Every radar emission from their cockpits, every burst of communication back to their base, every heat signature from their engines was logged in real time. What Caracas thought was intimidation was, in truth, a live intelligence feed handed to the U.S. on a silver platter. This moment illustrates the reality Venezuela can't escape. Their air force is a shadow of its former self. Back in 1982, when the first F-16 arrived under the Peace Delta program, Venezuela became the first country in Latin America to operate the type. At the time, it was a major leap forward. Supersonic performance, agile dogfighting, and radars that were cutting edge for the era. For a while, Caracas had a credible deterrent. But 4 decades later, that edge has evaporated. Years of sanctions cut off access to spare parts. Maintenance became a nightmare. Analysts believe that out of the original 24 fighters, maybe 3 or 4 remain airworthy. Those few are kept flying only by cannibalizing others for parts, improvising fixes, and praying that the engines hold together. Technologically, they are frozen in time. These are early Block F-16A and F-16B models. Outdated avionics, no stealth shaping, limited data link capability, radars designed before GPS was commonplace. Against an opponent like the U.S. Navy, they're effectively blind. Now contrast that with the ship they tried to rattle. The Arleigh Burke isn't just a warship, it's a floating fortress. Over 500 feet long, displacing nearly 10,000 tons, and designed to fight across every domain. Air, sea, land, and beneath the waves. Its beating heart is the Aegis Combat System, a central brain that fuses radar data, weapons, and satellite feeds into one seamless picture. The ship's SPY-1 radar can track more than 100 targets at once. The newer SPY-6 installed on the latest variants goes even further, spotting stealthier, smaller threats at longer ranges. To put it bluntly, if you're flying toward a Burke, the ship knew you were there long before you even saw the horizon. And then comes the arsenal. Buried beneath the deck are up to 96 vertical launch cells, each one capable of holding a different weapon. SM-2s and SM-6s for high-altitude aircraft and long-range intercepts, ESSMs for medium-range defense, Tomahawks for land attack, ASROC rockets for submarines. Think of it as a customized arsenal, locked and loaded beneath the steel. And that's just the long-range firepower. If an enemy somehow slips through, the destroyer's last line of defense is brutal. The Phalanx CIWS, a 20mm Gatling gun that spits out 75 rounds per second, shredding anything that dares get close. Many ships also add CRAM launchers, another short-range missile layer designed to kill incoming threats. Put all of this together and you don't just get a ship, you get a bubble of layered defenses, a self-contained fortress. So when Venezuelan pilots buzzed the Dunham, they weren't rattling a vulnerable target. They were poking at one of the most lethal naval platforms afloat. The imbalance is so extreme that the outcome of a real clash isn't even in question. One side has outdated fighters limping through the skies. The other commands a network of destroyers, cruisers, stealth fighters, satellites, and drones, all stitched together into a kill web. And here's the part that makes this encounter dangerous. The risk isn't that Venezuelan F-16s could sink a U.S. destroyer. They can't. The risk is that one wrong move, a pilot holding his pass too long, a missile radar accidentally locking, a nervous finger pressing the trigger, could spark an escalation neither side truly wants. That's why the Pentagon didn't brush this flyby off. It called it highly provocative, dangerously close to sparking something bigger. And the U.S. response was swift. Within days, 10 F-35 Lightning IIs were deployed to Puerto Rico, placing fifth-generation stealth aircraft just hours away from Venezuelan airspace. Meanwhile, at least 7 U.S. warships remained on station in the Caribbean. The message was unmistakable. If Venezuela wanted to keep playing chicken, the U.S. was prepared to raise the stakes. In the end, Venezuela's F-16s are symbols, not weapons. Relics paraded to project strength, but in reality hopelessly outclassed. Against an Arleigh Burke, they wouldn't just lose, they'd never get close enough to fire a shot. So the real question is this: was Venezuela's flyby a bold act of resistance, or just a dangerous miscalculation? If you were standing on that deck, hearing the roar of afterburners overhead, would you see 2 supersonic fighters or 2 targets that never stood a chance?